from the Penn Libraries.
So thank you for including me in this gathering. I am a classicist, I am a humanist. I don't think you get more humanist than classics. And one of the things I want to talk about is precisely that. I'm not going to make predictions because, in fact, the project that you're looking at is 20 years old. When I got into this kind of experimentation in digital humanities, people were saying, well, we all know there aren't going to be bricks and mortar universities in 20 years. And here we all are. So the whole concept of predicting where this is going to go is beyond me, frankly. But I've been happy to be involved in it, not as a full-time activity, really as a kind of a way of potentiating my day job, which is to teach students in whatever way. Now, I am a classicist. I teach one of the most canonical poets and one of the most canonical poems, Virgil's Aeneid, which is generally known as the national epic of the Romans. And people bring to this text a number of suppositions that they often have to unlearn. Because over the course of my career, which is 30 years or so now, it's been the case that the possible meanings of this poem have exploded and proliferated in ways that I don't think could have been imagined very easily. This is contrary to what most people think is true of classical literature. People think of it as having a fairly stable set of meanings that we can use as a reference point for measuring the complexity of modern text or the differences between the ancient and the modern world. But what really has happened with Virgil in particular is that the notion of the epic poem as something that contains a variety of perspectives that you didn't know existed has been, as I say, characteristic of research and teaching in recent years. So how does this come across in the classroom? There are two basic ways. The two basic formats in which I teach Virgil are seminar formats, usually teaching the poem in Latin to a small number of students, very patiently going through the text, very slowly teasing out meanings. And this tends, to a certain extent, to privilege the notion that there is a correct meaning, right? Because just teaching a language, right, involves a certain amount of right and wrong. You really can mistranslate things. And you have to make sure that students don't do that, or at least that their misreadings are creative and interesting ones. Or teaching in a lecture class like this to maybe 100 or more students, in which you basically tell them, to some extent, what the poem means, and you try to convince them that it has a number of different meanings, but they don't necessarily want to hear that. They kind of want to know what's going to be on the exam, get the right answer. But I've often found that in settings like this, when I can, and quite honestly, the most important technological tool that I've ever encountered in 30 years of teaching is the one that's in my hand right now that has the capacity to get a little bit of quick feedback from a classroom like this one, right? Not just make it a one-way sermon, but a little bit more interactive, is when I ask students, even for off-the-wall ideas about this poem, it enriches the discussion. And I'm knowledgeable enough about the way in which interpretation of the poem goes that I can relate even some of their crazier ideas to some of the more mainstream ideas that are out there. But also, it's the case that students now come to this poem from quite different cultures, right? So this can be treated as an obstacle. If they don't know who Jupiter is, they have to be taught who Jupiter is. But on the other hand, if they come from another national tradition that involves epic poetry based on quite different suppositions from the Aeneid, that enriches the discussion, often in unpredictable ways. So the challenge to me has been, how can you bring these two levels of instruction together? How can you have a way of presenting the poem in detail, in a way that takes account of the fact that there are certain aspects of it that are right and wrong, but put it together with the kind of large potential audience and universe, really, of ideas that are potentially quite illuminating. And teaching online is one of the ways in which I think that's possible. So the resource that I'm showing you here, the Virgil Project, is not a very complicated thing. As I say, it started out 20 years ago, and it is simply a text of the poem, the Aeneid, with a number of different readerly aids, so that there are hyperlinks here on all of these different words, and you can go over here and get things like translation, grammatical information, There are some commentaries, notes, things like that over here. So it's a way of bringing the poem, or the entry level to the poem in a detailed way down a few notches so that it's more accessible to people, and so that you don't have to be in the same room with anybody in order to take advantage of that. But the other aspect of it is that all of this grammatical information and things like that over here actually do contain some of the testable information that you can use in order, even across distances, to help students bring their basic language skills up to the level that you want them to be. Okay? So this has been in a couple of manifestations over the past 20 years, and I'm now actually just, in fact, this week got approval for a MOOC on Virgil that I will be putting together over the month of December and I guess into January, and offering soon in the hope of taking this live and teaching it to a very wide audience of people, some of whom I hope will be doing the poem in Latin, some of whom will be doing it in a variety of translations, but in a platform where we can bring their different interests together, where we can bring a large number of different perspectives on the poem together, because I do truly think that the only way that you can comprehend what's in a poem like this is to have the largest number of people in a community trying to make sense of it together and comparing their different perspectives. And I hope that the software that SAS Computing has been good enough to support over these years will be one of the modalities that will help us to wed those two perspectives, the kind of insider specialist linguistic-based perspective and that of the more general reader. It's also true, I should say, that there's room for a lot of student input at the basic level with this. So if we have a look at, well, all of this material was actually put in by students some years ago under my direction. And that's a relatively easy kind of research project to conduct, less complex even, I think, than the one that Jim English was just talking about, because it takes advantage of the kind of work that you do with students every day in every Latin classroom. This is the sort of thing they have to learn. I think of it as just harvesting the work that people do all the time anyway, and gathering it in one place and making it available. And I would like, talk to Jim about this as well, I would like to expand this so that we can teach the entire corpus of Latin poetry and Latin literature this way. Here I'm able to build on the fact that classics, being the kind of discipline it is, and because of a couple of historical accidents, has been digitized for years. And there are lots and lots of experiments out there that one can take advantage of, choose the best, don't worry about the things that don't work so well, put them together, and really have quite a rich learning environment. So basically what I wanted to tell you was that this is the way in which I approach this, and I suppose that the takeaway for me is that this is not an entirely new way of teaching. This is a way of potentiating the way that I've always taught, taking it to a larger number of students, quite selfishly allowing me to teach the subject that I love more frequently, because I have responsibilities here on campus and I can't be teaching Virgil all the time, 24/7. But with this kind of platform, I can have something a little bit more like that. So for me, that's quite satisfying. And also, of course, the possibility of bringing one's subject to a larger and more diverse student body. So these are the quite traditional, in a way, sorts of satisfactions that I think come from this kind of teaching. For me, it's basically about lowering the bar of access to specialist information and making it possible for there to be a larger and more diverse community of learners. And that in itself, I think, is a very satisfying possibility and one that I hope that we will see realized within the next 5 years. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.